I remember we had Gerald Fry years ago at the farm, a wonderful fella. And I remember he spent the whole day on the farm, and he ended the day by saying, he told us, now listen, if you don't remember anything I've told you, remember this. You as a food producer have a sacred responsibility. And the moment that you exchange value in money and you create an exchange with your customer for the food that you produced, you become personally responsible for their health. And he said, never forget that. And we haven't forgot that. It's stuck with us.
You're listening to Grassfed, a show that shares the secrets to selling perishable food products online. The show and advice is brought to you by the team at Seven Sons, which is an 8-figure e-commerce business that started completely from scratch. Each episode, we bring you one topic, 3 strategies, and one tangible resource to continue your learning and put you on the fast track in your own e-commerce journey. Let's begin.
All right, quality is more important than quantity. 1 home run is much better than 2 doubles. That's a quote from Steve Jobs. We like Steve Jobs quotes.
Oh, yeah,
you picked this one out. Is this your favorite Jobs quote?
No, but he's got a lot of good ones.
All right, my name is Brooks, and I'm joined with my brother Blaine, CEO here of the team at Seven Sons. And today our topic is going to be on quality. So, and for the 3rd time, we have Dr. Alan Williams, joining us again as our domain expert to talk about the top 3 factors that affect the quality of grass-fed beef. So, Alan, we're excited to have you join us again.
Well, thank you.
So we have introduced Alan on previous episodes, and Alan's fun to introduce because you get to choose so many different titles to introduce Alan as. So you want to use doctor, author.
Yes, movie star.
But Alan, I think it would maybe be helpful if you, for anyone who's joining this episode, haven't listened to any of the rest, if you could just share, again, a quick, brief highlight of what it is you do and what you're doing today. So.
Absolutely. So my partners and I founded a company called Understanding Ag, and we work very specifically in regenerative agriculture. So we work with farmers and ranchers across North America, and we've been privileged to be able to work with farmers and ranchers now in a total, I think, of 54 different countries.
Awesome.
Wow.
So it has become a global effort. And that has been very gratifying to see people, no matter where they're living on this earth, actually starting to resonate with regenerative agriculture and its benefits. We also formed the Soil Health Academy as a nonprofit teaching arm, and we have done Soil Health Academy so far in many different states in the U.S., in Canada, in Mexico, and next year we are going to be doing Soil Health Academies not only in North America but also in Germany and the UK, and we've had invitations from many other places.
Wow. Congrats on that. I know that, Alan, you've had a big impact on our farm, as I mentioned in the last episode, and one of the reasons we've so appreciated working with you, Alan, is because you come across folks that have a good understanding of soil health. You come across folks that have a good understanding of what we're talking about in today's topic, the quality of grass-fed beef and factors that affect quality. So the product end of things and the genetics, the forages. There's so much to know, and you've just been so helpful connecting the dots between even all the way to the marketing and connecting with the customer. You've just helped us connect those dots in a deep, meaningful way, and that's been really valuable to us over the years. So we appreciate that. So,
yeah, and I think that's a great way to maybe start off kind of some context for this episode. Thinking about building a direct marketing business and a production business as well. There's for anyone who's listening who's maybe in that startup phase, there's obviously many different aspects to this that they need to focus on. Where does quality fall? And that priority level of when you're starting a business? Is that the number one thing you need to focus on and get right? Or do you go, on that marketing offensive and do the hard work of finding a customer first and then go back to zero in on this marketing thing or quality thing?
Well, in my opinion, quality is absolutely number one, because you're putting food in people's mouths, and there is nothing more critical or important that you can ever do.
Yep.
Because food beyond water is the one thing that people must have. And it's not only a must-have just to sustain ourselves, but it's a must-have for our ultimate health, vigor, and viability. And let's face it, food is also one of the most social things that we do in our lives. That's all of the important events of life are centered around food. And so food is what brings us all together. It's what nourishes us. It's what establishes our health. And if that's what we're charged with doing, and we are, then quality must be at the very top of that list.
I remember we had Gerald Fry years ago at the farm, a wonderful fella. And I remember he spent the whole day on the farm, and he ended the day by saying, he told us, now listen, if you don't remember anything I've told you, remember this. You as a food producer have a sacred responsibility. And the moment that you exchange value in money and you create an exchange with your customer for the food that you produced, you become personally responsible for their health. And he said, never forget that. And we haven't forgot that. It's stuck with us. And it's important. And we've always talked, Brooks, over the years that for us to be successful in our business, we have to focus on convenience. We have to win the customer's trust, but we have to provide a quality product. And you have to do all three of those. Think of it as a three-legged stool. If you're missing just one leg, the entire stool topples. But quality is important because it starts from the foundation, from the beginning. And there's nothing worse. And when we're talking about the quality of grass-fed beef, it can take us 18 to 24 months to raise a grass-finished beef animal. And if you've made mistakes, you don't want to wait until month 24 when you process that animal to realize, I made some mistakes here. So that's why we wanted to get you on, Alan, to help save folks 24 months of spinning their wheels, kind of like we were talking about with soil health. What are the things that we look for? What are the actions we can take to know earlier on, are we producing a quality product before, again, we've wasted too much time? So
absolutely. And then, and if we go back to just this time factor, and we, I like to take it all the way back to the time that we breed that cow. And she conceives, so when we add in those 9 months, we're looking at 30 months to 3 years of age from the very first moment of conception of that animal to the point that we are harvesting that animal. And so that's a lot of investment.
Yep.
So you're absolutely right, and we need to make sure we get that investment right.
And it's a lot of work to go find a customer and to win that customer's trust. The last thing you want to do is provide a less than great dinner table eating experience, because you want that customer to come back.
That will be the first capacity on your ability to grow if you can't get any customer to come back.
It's too much work to find customers. They have to come back. So quality is absolutely essential.
Absolutely. And so when we think about what do I consider to be the top 3 things that influence the quality of that end product on grass-fed beef, number 1, and this is near and dear to my heart, is soil health. We had a podcast on that, and the entire podcast was centered around soil health, but it's still critical here. It doesn't matter what else you do. If you have poor soil health and you're not able to grow nutrient-dense, flavorful plants in that soil, you're not going to have a very good end product. And so there's several things that are going to be lacking in that end product. First and foremost is the flavor. You're just simply not going to have the deep mineralization that you need in that meat to impart the flavors that people are going to enjoy. The second, though, is the fact that greater soil health manifests itself in that end product through higher nutrient density. So this exact same beef is actually going to be much more nutritious for that consumer if it's grown and produced in truly healthy soil. And the third thing that impacts the ultimate quality of that end product relative to soil health is the health of the animal itself. So if these animals are produced on healthy soil, they stay healthier. They're not producing stress hormones that are being distributed throughout their body and basically causing weakened immune systems. They're far more resistant to disease and pest and anything else that they may encounter. And that is going to manifest itself in a far better and more flavorful end product. So I've always got to start with soil health.
Well, and you're probably going to get to this, but obviously the healthier their soil is, you're going to be growing higher energy forages and we know that if you've produced grass-fed beef, that's the tough part to get into the animal's system is the energy. That's kind of usually the lacking point. So yeah, that makes sense. And I wanted to pick up on what you said about nutrient density. We love to, when we're talking to our customers, get them used to the term nutrients per dollar spent. Not
Yes.
calories, not pounds or ounces. It's nutrients. Beef is not beef. Corn. You were just talking about this on the last episode, how the nutrient value can be measured now. So cool.
Absolutely. And so really that segues us pretty well into the second most critical factor, and that is plant species diversity. Many people are trying to produce grass-fed beef on pastures that are either monoculture or low diversity. And that inevitably leads to, first of all, a lack of soil health.
Yep.
When we have low soil health, we're going to typically tend to have low diversity in plant species in those pastures. So they go hand in hand. Secondly, it means that the plants that they're eating, if you don't have good soil health and a lot of diversity out there, those plants themselves are not going to be taking up as many minerals. So they're going to be lower in nutrient density themselves. So the animals are consuming plants that don't have the power-packed nutrients that we're seeking in a very high quality end product. The other thing that happens here when we have diversity in plant species is that many of these plant species, particularly forbs and flowering plants, produce medicinal compounds that are very beneficial to our livestock out on the pastures and the wildlife that are partaking of these plants. So they stay far healthier. It's sort of like your in-pasture pharmacy.
Yeah.
They're able to self-medicate every day. These plants also produce compounds, phytochemical compounds, that are anti-parasitic in nature. So instead of having to use chemical dewormers that are not good for our livestock, but are also not good for the life in the soil, they kill dung beetles, they kill earthworms, they kill a host of other organisms. We can not have to use these chemical dewormers if we have plant species diversity, because of the anti-parasitic properties in many of these plants that they can consume. And then the final factor that is really huge in terms of plant species diversity is that it provides an incredible complexity of flavor to that beef or lamb or chicken or pork or whatever is out there foraging on those pastures. So low diversity results in low flavor profile and complexity. High diversity results in a very high, rich flavor profile and complexity.
So, Alan, when you were here, again, I don't know how long ago it was, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, this was the big takeaway the first time you were here, is you helped us retrain our eye as far as what an ideal pasture actually looks like. We always had it in our mind that it looks uniform, it just looks lush all the time, it just has some grass and some clovers, and that's about it. And we were very wrong, and we learned to retrain our eye that we want to see a story of diversity. We want to allow the plants to more time to mature so you can get that diversity of plant species. And that actually increased the total bricks of our pastures by letting those plants mature more. The more diversity that came as we rested our pastures more, it really kicked off the system for us. And that was a big turning point for us, Alan, when you taught us how to look at a pasture and retrain our eye for what we want. And ultimately, you're going to see what many would call weeds out in your pasture. But now we walk out and we see those different plants that we used to call weeds, and we're excited to see those there. So cool.
Well, it's amazing how much the livestock will consume those weeds that I call forbs.
Yep.
And the other benefit that we get from this, from an ecosystem standpoint, beyond just the end product quality in that beef, is the fact that diversity of plant species attracts a whole host of pollinators and other beneficial insects, birds, and many other species of wildlife. So we're actually building these incredibly rich, diverse ecosystems full of wildlife.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what I really like about what you're sharing here, is just how it works together, and you get these other benefits that come along of trying to focus on quality. But then you're talking about, helping out with the parasite load here with the, plant species diversity and all the other host of benefits that you mentioned as well. So number 1 is soil health. Number 2, plant species diversity. What's number 3?
Number 3 is really pretty simple, but a lot of people miss this. It is the degree of finish in those animals.
Yep.
So you can do all of this, you can have excellent soil health, excellent plant species diversity, but if you don't get these animals fully finished, then you're still going to be lacking in that end product quality. You may have the nutrient density there, but in terms of final juiciness and flavor profile of that carcass and your overall yield and sellable product, you need to get these animals fully finished. And many producers do not understand what a proper degree of finish looks like on an animal. And they need to train themselves, train their eye, so that they recognize that and give those animals time. Don't try to rush them, but give them time to achieve that full level of finish, where in the beef world, we're going to look for them to grade USDA choice and better at that optimal degree of finish.
You can't, and this takes a lot of discipline, Alan. This is a big mistake we made, and we finally had that, because a lot of times you have processing dates that you have scheduled and you have customers that you've committed to, but don't be tempted. If the animals are not finished, you have to delay, because we talked about how important quality is. You can, and you just said you can do all those other things right, and just by taking the animals in 2 months too early,
Yep.
you lose that customer and you've defeated all the work that you've done. So you have to be patient, and that was a big mistake that we made, Alan, early on. We repeated that mistake probably for the first 5 years, and that wasn't great. So
during that time where you're practicing self-control, you're being patient, what are you looking for to know when we have reached that degree of finish?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. And so there's several key places you look on the animal, the exterior of the animal, to determine optimal degrees of finish. First, I want to look across the ribs. A beef animal has 26 ribs, 13 on each side. And in an animal that is optimally finished, they're going to have a nice spongy fat cover across the ribs, and you're not going to be able to visually see or count any of those ribs, even when that animal makes a turn. So a really well-finished animal, the ribs are going to be obscured by that back fat or subcutaneous fat layer. The next place I look is across the top of that animal. I want to see a nice smooth turn over the top, and not any sharpness. So if you can see spinous processes sticking up, the bone, then you know that they're not optimally finished yet. So you want a nice smooth top. And on some animals that are ideally finished, they're actually going to butterfly. They're going to indent right along that top line. I then look from the hooks to the pins, the front of the pelvis to the back of the pelvis, and look for degree of fill. So I don't want to see skeletal sharpness at the hooks or the pins in that pelvic structure. I want to see a nice smooth turn from the hooks to the pins. Then I'm going to look at the depth of the heart girth and depth of the flank. So animals that are well finished are going to have a nice deep heart girth and a deep flank. They're going to have deposited fat in those areas. And then the final two places I'm going to look to make my determination on when they're really ready to go to the processor, I'm going to look at the tail head for poning of fat, P-O-N, fat pones.
Okay.
And those look almost like little puffs of air up underneath the skin on either side of the tail head, like somebody stuck a air pump underneath and puffed up the hide. Mm-hmm. But when you start to see that poning, you know that animal is getting very, very close to being optimally finished. And then the final place I look, and the final determining factor for me, is the degree of deposit of fat in the brisket.
Yep.
So you look directly at the front of that animal, do a front view and a side view. And if that brisket is what I call high and tight, it's still closely connected to the chest floor and has a definitive sharp point, those animals are not finished. What you want to see is a brisket that is almost exaggerated in appearance. It's going to be very deep. I call that distended, but a very deep distended brisket, and it's going to have some width to the floor of that brisket. Now, when I see that, it's almost like somebody took a football and stuck it in the brisket.
Yep.
So that's what we're looking for, is that really nice, deep distended brisket with a wide floor to it. And when you see that, that animal has done about all it can do, and it's reached its ideal degree of finish.
And I couldn't recommend more, especially if you're new to this and this sounds a little overwhelming to catch all these different points that Alan mentioned. At least go to another farm that's doing what you want to do, and they're doing a good job finishing, and have them show you what their finished animals look like, and specifically look in that brisket area, because that's always been the easiest one for me over the years. Blake knows the other spots. He knows what to look for, but I always look at that brisket. It's the easiest one, I think, to learn, and it's a very important visual factor. So
Absolutely.
So, but I have a question. When you're going through this and say, this is early on, I've learned a lot of great points here, what to look for. But for animals that have been processed, they're on the carcass, is there something I can then look for or do at that point if I think, hey, these may not have been to the degree of finish I needed, or just weren't up to the quality standards? There's something I can look for and something different I can do with that carcass to still, provide a quality product to my customers.
Yeah, so if you don't have that ideal degree of finish, and obviously you've harvested that animal, so you've got to use the carcass at this point. There's a host of options. So one of the things that you can do to be able to improve the tenderness and the flavor profile of that carcass is to do dry aging. So you can have your processor do a good dry aging, a minimum of 14 days. Really is desired on a carcass like that to be able to get the tenderness and the flavor concentration that you want. And that does a good job. Mm-hmm. Now, that does mean that your dry aging is both a science and an art. Mm-hmm. So your processor has to understand the art part of this. And there's three critical factors there to good dry aging. It's temperature, humidity in that cooler, and air speed. You've got to have good airflow around that carcass, or air circulation around it. So you don't want carcasses touching each other, sides of the carcass touching each other.
And you see that all the time. You walk into small processors, they're always low on cooler space.
Exactly. So, They got to have, everywhere that they touch, they're going to form bacterial plaques during that dry aging process. And that's complete trim loss. You're going to have to trim all of that off, and you just lost all of that sellable product. So a good dry aging process can help. A good wet aging process can also help to add further tenderness. So if you fabricate, if you don't have the capability, or your processor doesn't, to be able to dry age adequately, then they can fabricate or break down that carcass, say at 48 to 72 hours, but leave the primals intact, and then wet age those primals for about 3 weeks before you do further portioning and then freezing, and that'll help add further tenderness. The other is you've got to consider how you're going to potentially cut that carcass up or fabricate it. because if they're not optimally finished, that's going to limit some of the things that you can do. You're going to grind more of the carcass, unfortunately, but still that gives you a good, hamburger to sell, a good grind product to sell. And you've got to be very careful on your middle meats. You don't want to do excessive trim because you already don't have the degree of back fat in an underfinished animal that you would like. What you don't want to do is you don't want to make the mistake of trimming what is there off. You want to leave whatever back fat is there on those exterior primal cuts, because that adds a little more flavor. They cook better, and it actually protects them more from drying out, freezer burn, those types of things when they're in the freezer.
I know, Brooks, something that we've done over the years, especially in our early days, is we would ask and some processors will do this, but go ahead and cut a ribeye steak. If the carcass is already cut in half, go ahead and cut a ribeye steak from each carcass. Like if we took in 4 animals, we'd ask for 4 steaks from each one and take them home and cook it up and just see. So that was one way that we kind of judge quality after they're on the rail. And as Alan mentioned, if you don't have the quality, you may have to grind some of those higher end cuts, but there's also a lot of things you can do with the grind. Over the years, we've offered a lot of different ground beef products, from taking parts of the sirloin or all the steaks and grinding those together. Now, be careful, don't get it too lean, but put those together, produce a ground sirloin or a steak burger, and sell that for a higher end. We currently take our short rib and we bone that out, and then we mix it with the brisket and some chuck, and we market a gourmet ground beef, and it is the most flavorful ground beef that we offer. So you can get creative with the ground beef. You can still create a lot of value. You don't want to be tempted to just save those steaks, even if they're not the quality that your customer expects.
And you're going to want to get creative with it, and that's going to be the last resort you're going to want to do is turn to grounds and some of those creative things you can do, because obviously you don't want to compromise. Still sending them through, cutting them up as steaks and roasts, and compromising that quality and trust that your customers have come to expect.
Yep.
So
absolutely.
Great tips. So I didn't have a resource to leave everyone with at the end of this episode, but Alan, do you have maybe a book or something that you would recommend to someone who's getting started that they can really hone into and dive deeper into this topic of quality?
One of the books that it doesn't necessarily address this directly, but it addresses all the critical points is Before You Have a Cow, that I co-wrote with Teddy Gentry.
Yes.
And we do cover all of these points in that book. We released that in 2014, and that is available. You can order it through our Soil Health Academy or Understanding Ag websites.
We'll put a link in the show notes.
We weren't lying. Author Alan Williams.
Yep, that's right. Cool.
And we are currently, Gabe Brown and myself are currently working on a book and actually a series of books that will address this as well as many other questions within regenerative agriculture.
Cool. That's news to me. Can't wait.
Alrighty. Well, hey, that was 3 tips were, again, to be looking at your soil health. That's going to give you the diversity of flavor, healthy animals, nutrient-dense product, plant species diversity. So there you're looking for plant species diversity out in the pastures. That's going to give you that more complex flavor, and then the degree of finish. So again, actionable things that you can take action on to make sure that you're bridging this quality gap for your customers. So Alan, thanks again for joining us. We always appreciate it.
It's been a lot of fun. Yep.
Thank you.